how come some illustrations look so at home on the page while others feel sort of loose or they don't quite belong there? What makes some illustrations feel like they're just part of the page while others feel like they're sort of just slapped onto it, sort of floating there without any sense of purpose or integration? Hello, my name is Mr. Tom Froese. I'm an illustrator, top teacher on Skillshare, and the host of the Thoughts on Illustration podcast. In this video, I'm going to share with you what I call the 3 structural principles of composition. These are 3 very simple ways to give your illustrations more of a sense of structure so they do feel more unified and at home on the page. This is a lesson from my Skillshare class Composition for Illustrators that I'm sharing with you here for free. By learning these 2 grids plus one other principle that I have in this video, I really believe you'll be on your way to making stronger compositions. If you like this video and you're interested in learning more about how composition works specifically for illustration, please check out the full class Composition for Illustrators on Skillshare. I'll leave a link in the video description where you can get 30 days free membership on Skillshare, or you can just go to tomfroese.com/teaching. All right, here's the lesson. I hope you enjoy. When you look into outer space, what's holding all the stars and planets and galaxies in place where they are? Astronomers actually believe there's something called dark matter. This is the glue that holds all these galaxies together. The invisible force that holds a composition together is a lot like dark matter. We know it's there even though we can't see it, and we can definitely sense when it's not there. Scientists can say that dark matter probably exists even if they can't measure it directly. We can see the evidence by the way things kind of hold together. So in the same way, artists can say that there's some kind of invisible glue that holds our compositions together, giving it that elusive sense of unity we all crave in our work. So what is this compositional glue? It's structure. And to give our composition structure, we look to grids. Grids are a great way to bring a sense of structure to the page where we might not otherwise find it. While there are thousands of grids and other possible ways to structure our compositions, in this lesson, we'll look at just 3. We're going to do 2 grids, the rule of thirds and harmonic armatures, and then we'll look at what I call self-structured compositions. So let's look at the rule of thirds first. So the rule of thirds is kind of like a grid with instructions on how to use that grid. It tells us where we can put our subject in an image to make the most interesting image. And it also gives us a guideline for how to structure the page in terms of proportion, like how much of the page should we fill with figure versus ground. As a grid, it's pretty simple. There are just 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines that divide the page up into 3 rows and 3 columns, which makes 9 equal squares. In terms of placement, the general idea is that you should place your subject at either the left or the right third of the composition or at one of the intersections of these lines. Now, in terms of proportion, the rule of thirds suggests that the ratio of figure to ground should be 1/3 to 2/3, either 1 part figure and 2 parts ground, or the other way around. For landscapes and other scenes, the rule of thirds will suggest that you place the horizon line along either of the horizontal lines. So you're going to give either 2/3 or 1/3 of the image to sky, depending on where you put that line. Typically, we place the horizon line along the lower third. Now, this rule of thumb is great because of its simplicity, and it really is tried and true. A lot of experts say that the rule of thirds works, and I think we should believe them. When we don't have a strong sense of composition, we can trust that the rule of thirds works for most situations. That's not to say we shouldn't be thinking for ourselves here as well. Sometimes just centering our subject and making it larger in the frame is perfectly fine. Just ask Wes Anderson, who's based his entire career out of doing this. Now let's look at harmonic armatures. A harmonic armature is a geometrical grid of lines, not just in straight up and down and side to side directions, but also on diagonals. In this way, harmonic armatures give us a more flexible grid system, and this gives us more options for building structure into our compositions in more dynamic ways. A harmonic armature has the rule of thirds grid built into it, but it's kind of like the rule of thirds on steroids because it just gives you so many more options with all those extra angles. Personally, I'd never heard of harmonic armatures until very recently, actually not until researching for this class. I don't know what the science is behind harmonic armatures, but it really seems to work well for me. I like that it gives me the 3x3 grid plus all these various interesting spaces and intersections to line things up along more in diagonals. I also find it really interesting to lay harmonic armature grids over existing artwork, like by other artists, to see how intentional they are about using such rules in their compositions. For example, when I've put it over the work of Miroslav Šašek or Paul Rand, I instantly found a direct relationship between this grid and their compositions. It makes me think that they must be very intentional about using this particular kind of grid. Now, the question is that true? Are they really using harmonic armatures on purpose, or is it a coincidence? Are harmonic armatures just so flexible and catch-all that, like a horoscope, they seem to apply no matter what the situation? Either way, I've started using these in my own work just as an experiment, but also to help create a more complex and invisible structure in my compositions. Now, there is the risk that you will overutilize this grid and your illustrations will be so heavily influenced by it that it will be very obvious. What should have been an invisible source of unity in your art could, in the words of designer Al Hurlbert, end up being more like a straitjacket. So the last source of structure that I want to talk about is what I call self-structured composition. So when structuring our compositions, we can create this sense of everything holding together artificially, as we did with the grids, or we can find something within the content that we're actually using in the illustration as the structure of the illustration. This is what I would call intrinsic structure or self-structure, where little or no help is needed to really help the illustration hold together. So an example of what I'm talking about here is maybe an apartment building with many windows, where in each one we see a different scene. And we have this apartment building as the dominant object in the scene. So we just have this natural grid of windows that we can structure our illustration or story around. Another example of self-structure is in a figurative illustration where the figure just dominates the composition and therefore provides all the structure that we need. The illustration holds together just by the way the body or figure fills the space. An illustration can also be considered self-structured if it's really simple, if there's just like one object and it's really large, or it's one dominant object and all the other ones kind of gravitate around it, almost like moons around a planet. This is an example of a more organic kind of self-structure. An illustrated map is also a self-structured composition because the roads or other geographical features kind of at the bottom layer provide a structure for the illustrated icons and lettering and everything else that's on top. Even when laying out an illustration with lettering or type, such as a book cover, it's not always necessary to impose a grid. It could be enough for the illustration itself to dominate the page and to just balance it out with a much smaller title and byline. So those are your three principles of structure. We have the rule of thirds, harmonic armatures, and then just self-structured. So now that we've come to the end of this lesson, here's something that you can try yourself. Gather 5 to 10 illustrations that you like from the internet and analyze the structure of the composition. Next, using the rule of thirds or harmonic armatures grids that I've provided as downloads in the class, see how many of the illustrations conform to one of these grids. What did you find? Were most of the compositions aligned with either of these grids, or were they more random? Have fun trying this, and again, if you want, you can share what you find here in this exercise on the class projects page. When you're ready, I'll see you in the final lesson. All right, thank you so much for watching. You can take the full class composition for illustrators on Skillshare by using the link below, or you can find it at tomfroese.com/teaching. And of course, using my links, you'll get 30 days free membership on Skillshare.